Um, or maybe not, you'll just hear that. Welcome, everybody. I'm glad to see so many of you jumped in. We had a really great registration for this webinar, so guessing it's something that impacts a lot of folks. And I'm happy to be sharing it today. I see some of you have been in some of my webinars before, so welcome back. But I also see some new faces, so I'm glad to have you join. My name is Amy Ray. I work for Zeldis Research. A lot of you, I think, know that we're a full service research firm that specializes in insurance and financial services and healthcare. So you'll see as we go through this presentation that a lot of the examples that I have are related to those industries in which we operate. But hopefully there's something for everybody here. So today we're going to be talking about finding the needle in the B2B haystack. How do we find those really, really tough B2B audiences, right? So what do I mean by the B2B needle? I don't mean your standard B2B audience. So, there's a lot of B2B audiences that are relatively easy to get feedback from. Standard financial professional or advisor, a GP, doctor, relatively easy. There's, sources out there that you can go to that have, panels or databases of those folks. I'm not talking about those. I'm talking about the ones that are really niche, that are hard to find, that are low incidence, really low incidence, like small population. So, for example, maybe a neurosurgeon versus a GP, or instead of finding a financial advisor, you're looking for the person within an advisory firm who makes the decisions about products and providers, right? So a harder to find audience. You'll see that we're also going to be talking. I mean, sometimes it's going to be a really tough audience, really hard to find. Sometimes it'll just be like maybe a more general B2B audience, but you need either a lot of them or you need geographically restricted, or within a more general B2B audience you're looking for something more specific. So you'll see some examples that are maybe the audience itself doesn't look as niche, but there's other parameters that make it a much harder to get B2B audience. So we're going to talk about some of the ways that we do that. Some of these you probably do and are familiar with. Maybe hopefully you'll see some maybe that you aren't familiar with or you haven't used. But before I jump into kind of our strategies in finding that B2B needle, I want to just kind of talk about some overall considerations when you're thinking about doing research with a really tough B2B audience. So the first thing I have up here, I say abandon quant for qual. You don't have to abandon quant. And you'll see there's plenty of examples in here where we did do quant research with difficult B2B audiences. But sometimes you can't. And sometimes you have to be realistic about what is possible depending on the audience. I think most of, the folks here are researchers themselves and have a more realistic view, but I do find sometimes that stakeholders don't always understand how hard it can be to find folks, and how realistic it is to find a quantitative number of folks. So for example, I just got a request recently for a proposal to do a quantitative survey. It started out it started out broader and it got kind of more and more narrow. And we ended up with they wanted CMOs at large national banks. So as you would imagine, that is a very small audience. That's a very high level audience. That's really tough. Like I'm not gonna be able to find 200 of them for you. That's gonna be really, really hard. So I think sometimes there can be a disconnect with what people think is possible and what is actually possible. So we try to keep expectations realistic. And so that sometimes means that, sure, we can do research with this audience, but it's probably going to be qualitative research and not quantitative research. So something to keep in mind. Some other things, high level, it's important with really difficult niche B2B audiences to create appealing engagements. And, one piece of that is just to make sure the research itself is convenient and it's like a reasonable commitment. It isn't too onerous, right? You don't want to make them do a hour-long survey. You have to be realistic about the burden on them. But in addition, you have to think about incentives, right? That's going to be the number one. You want these people, you are going to have to pay for them. They're not going to be an inexpensive audience. So that's something to make sure you're thinking about and are realistic about. You get what you pay for in this space for sure. Also, white glove. What do I mean by that? And kind of creating appealing engagements. Sometimes we will, depending on the audience and how high level they are, we might create kind of experiences for them. Research, but it's an experience, right? So it's not an IDI or a focus group, but maybe we're doing a wine and chat. We're creating an event that they're going to come to, that we're going to use to gather the insights we need. Also, just in terms of how we engage with them, how we communicate with them, it could be something as simple as when I'm doing IDIs with a sophisticated B2B audience. I might not use a tech. I might just onboard them myself. And so that I'm the one that they're interacting with. I'm the one who's sending out the appointment and the email. I'm just creating kind of a high touch, high service experience for them. Referrals, I think you'll see kind of within anything else we're talking about, referrals can be a great way if there is a network of people or if people are likely to know others like them who would meet the qualifications. That's always something you should be thinking about as a way to expand the sample that you're trying to reach. So those are kind of high level consideration. Now we're going to jump in to kind of the four potential approaches, and there may be others, but these are the ones we use most often. So we're going to talk about existing resources, using what you might already have or using tools that you have to reach tough audiences. Specialty recruiters, that's going to be, I mean, that's probably the most common way we reach difficult B2B audiences. So you may be familiar somewhat with some of these, but we'll talk about that. Industry sources, so kind of going within the professional space where these folks operate. That's one I think maybe isn't leveraged as often as it could be. So we'll talk about that. And then online sources and networking, which is a kind of combination of old school and new school sort of ground, doing the legwork on the ground to kind of build the sample that you need. So let's jump into the first one, existing resources. So sometimes folks don't know what they already have. So I have more than once, many times, been in a situation where my client tends to be in the research or insight space. We need to talk to this audience. I don't know how we're going to find them. And it turns out that someone within their broader organization actually already has a contact list. Might be in a different part of the organization that we weren't thinking about, but there may already be a list of contact information. Sometimes it can be tricky. It can be political to try to get a hold of it or be able to use it, or there might be restrictions on it, but it's definitely something that happens more than I would expect. So definitely be looking for what you already have in different parts of your organization. And then in terms of executing research with a difficult B2B audience, I think branding helps. You can't always do it, right? Depends on the type of study and, how important it is that they don't know who the sponsor is. But in situations where maybe that isn't as essential, branding absolutely can help the recruit, even if it's not like a captive audience to you or a customer audience to you. Just if you have a name in the industry, it still helps. And along with that, senior and executive leadership communication. So, sending out something from, ideally a CEO, a CMO, a head of distribution, whatever it is, somebody who is known both within the organization and outside of it, can also be really impactful in getting people to participate. Similarly, Salesforce communication, if there's some sort of distribution to a B2B audience that might have existing relationships or connections, that can be influential. Again, this is all coming within branding, right? Because you can't do any of this if it's not branded. Including a link to the research on portals or things that this audience might use in engaging with you. Again, only in certain situations does that make sense, but it absolutely can work. And then I think something that we do if there is a particular niche audience, and we do have certain difficult B2B audiences that we do need to go back to, time and again, asking them if they're willing to participate in future research. Sometimes you can pair that with a referral, like, refer a friend, but also, would you be willing to do this again? And you can build out your own kind of list or sample of the tough folks for future. And now you've got credibility. They know who you are. They're much more likely to respond. Now, of course, that's you're sacrificing kind of fresh folks every time if you do that because you're going back to the same people, but that isn't always a bad thing. I have plenty of studies that I've done where we've talked to a B2B audience, and I have clients who say, "Oh, they were so great and they gave us such great insights, and I would love, a year later, 2 years later, we're doing a study. I'd love to go back to that person. That person was great." So it's not always a bad thing to go back to people, especially for qualitative. But so these are all ways to kind of build from what you have, make things easier to get these folks. And I'm just going to kind of run through a couple of examples where we've done this. Again, they're going to mostly be in the industries we operate because that's what we do. So the first, we do a lot of work in the P&C, property and casualty insurance, and we need to do work with agents and brokers who sell excess and surplus, specific kind of insurance. It isn't, super common. They can be hard to find. I mean, I wouldn't call them the most niche B2B audience, but in this case, we needed quant, right? So we needed a large number of them, and that made it much more difficult and a tougher ask. So in this case, we were able to get a list from the sales force that was using it with prospects and agents that they worked with. We were able to brand it, and we were able to send a communication from a senior leader. All of that was a huge help in being able to get a quantitative survey done. In addition, in that survey, we asked if folks would be willing to participate in future research because this is an audience that we need to go back to again and again. And I just want to be clear from a logistic perspective, if we're doing that for a particular client, we're only using those future contacts for that client. We're not then using it for anybody who wants excess and surplus agents, just as a side note. In another case, we needed P&C agents. Not what I would call a niche audience, right? This is so general B2B audience, but we do a study every couple of years where we need well over 1,000 of them. And that becomes very, very difficult, right? That's a really big ask for a B2B audience. That's a really large sample size. And anybody who works with agents and brokers of any kind knows that they're not easy to get on panels or anything like that. So in this case, we do this for what's called the Big I, which is an association of independent insurance agents. And we get sample from different carriers because it's a multi-sponsored study. But in addition, we have more recently, some of the carriers will put a link on their website or their portal where agents and brokers might go in to the research, and that was a big help in helping us get to the sample size that we needed. And then, kind of in the mystery list category, we had to do some qualitative research they wanted to talk to the really top tier of retirement plan consultants. So consultants who work with companies, and in this case, very large companies, to consult on their defined contribution plans or 401ks and so forth. And they wanted like the highest level. And we were struggling with, how are we going to identify that? And that's really tough. And how are we going to find these folks? And it turned out that, unbeknownst to our immediate client right away, there had been, I think it was a publication, I don't know, it was Forbes, it was some publication that had come out with the top 100 retirement plan consultants in the nation. And the sales and marketing team at this company had been spending time sort of investigating, researching this list and filling out sort of contact information for these people, going to their websites, like finding it. And they had built a list of the 100 top retirement plan consultants in the country. So obviously that was perfect for what we wanted to do. I will say that example is like really like, it's like it fell out of the sky and it was this perfect thing. And that's probably pretty unusual. But I will say, like, it's not unusual that there's some information internally because other departments, especially sales, they're looking for contact information too. And they're doing sometimes a lot of legwork behind that. And so if you're able to leverage that, that can be really helpful. I just want to mention before I go to the next slide that there is a Q&A function at any point. I have it open here next to me. So if you have any questions or you want to dig in on anything that I mentioned, please feel free to put that in the Q&A. And I will do my best to pay attention to that and answer that. Okay, I'm going to talk about the next sort of approach. And I would say this is the most common. This is the one that we're using these days most often when it comes to really niche B2B audiences. This particular area has exploded a little bit. I feel like the number of companies that have entered the market of sort of specialty recruiting has really exploded in the last few years. I think it's a reaction to some of the issues with data quality on panels and B2B on panels that folks saw that this was an opportunity, that the completes that were coming from panels and B2B were not filling the need and were often not high quality and not the right people. They weren't vetted, they weren't verified. And so a number of folks entered the space. And this, I have some logos on here. Obviously, these are ones, some that we've worked with, some not that we're familiar with. It is not exhaustive. There are others I just worked with. One, I probably should have added it recently, called Martlin's. There's lots of them out there. This is not an exhaustive list. So if there's any vendors on the call, I did not leave you off on purpose. I just wanted to kind of put some examples out there. So this has been great in terms of having tools to be able to find people that before would have been impossible to find. And I'm gonna like put this on pause for a second because I want to just touch on something that I probably should have touched on earlier when I talked about the can we do quant or qual. I do just want to put out there, and I know a lot of folks on this call, so I know a lot of you already know this, but a lot of times a panel will give you feasibility that they can get a B2B audience and they can get it in super high numbers and it looks great. And you're like, oh my gosh, this is too good to be true. And I will just say in my experience that sometimes it really is too good to be true. So I would just kind of put a caution out there that if there are panels out there telling you they can get these really tough audiences in really high numbers, just take a pause, right? Just think about how big is this audience? So you think about an audience, right? You think about, let's say there's a niche B2B audience, really tough to get, small population. Let's say there's 10,000 of them in the country. Then you have to ask yourself, well, how many of those are going to be on panels? And they can tell you it's always going to be less than 1%. And in some cases, depending on who this person is, it's going to be even smaller. So I just think, doing the math sometimes is helpful. I think just looking at who these people are and you think about, would they be on a panel? Like, is the CMO of a, national bank going to be taking 15-minute surveys on a panel? Like, probably not. So I find that, again, the research folks I work with understand this. Sometimes their business partners don't. Sometimes they're like, oh, just go find them. They're out there. Go, oh, panel, like just go. And you have to be like, but why would those people be on a panel? Like, and we're not even able to get 500 of them. It just doesn't make sense. So I just wanted to take that pause and just kind of, and that's not to say that, we work with panels all the time and sometimes they do have approaches and they can get things, but it's just to have a critical and skeptical eye when you're looking at what you're getting promised, especially quantitatively on panels with these kinds of B2B audiences. All right, putting that aside, we're going back to our specialty recruiters, most of whom, are, in our experience, are delivering verified, vetted, the right people, high quality respondents. Some of whom will do just qual, but many of whom will do qual and quant. Maybe not quant in huge numbers, but will do quant. So these partners are not all just qual. Some have existing databases that they have built over time of professionals of B2B respondents. So they have them and they have profiling information on them, and that can make a recruit, easier and quicker. Others, many, most, all do custom recruiting fresh. So they will go out and find the people you are looking for, and they will go out and find, in my experience, nearly any audience. I mean, with varying degrees of success and feasibility in terms of how many, but they will go out and find these folks for you and vet them, make sure they're the right people. And so in my experience, you will get high quality respondents, the right people, and you will pay a lot of money. Like I'm not, I don't want to like sugarcoat that piece of it because you can imagine, right? If they're going out and they're finding them and they're vetting them and they're building this, using various, I don't have full visibility into all of their approaches, right? But they use all kinds of social media and they use expert next networks, and it comes at a cost. And they are paying the respondents a significant amount of money because they know who these people are and how valuable their time is, and they want to be able to work with them in the future. So they are, compensating them for their time. So just expect, and I can't give you a number because it really depends, but it is not unusual for us to be paying just for the recruit, not any other aspect of the research, not the moderation, not the platform, not any of it, just the recruit with the incentive, you know, certainly over $1,000 per, right? For a qual for like a 1 hour IDI type situation. Could be as low as five or 700. Could be as high. I don't even know how high it could go depending on who it is. And then for those who do quant, I mean, you're looking at a cost per interview in the hundred, over 100 for sure, or more than more than 100, 200, so this isn't something where you do 1,000 completes, not that they could even get that. But there's a cost involved. So I just want to be very clear about that. It's a great solution, but it's absolutely a get what you pay for kind of situation. Let me give you just a couple examples. This is, again, we do this most often, so we do this for a ton of different audiences, but I'll talk about a couple that even surprised me. I did a couple studies in the last couple years where I was looking for folks within an HRIS, so like Human Resources Information Systems. It's like the platform that companies use to manage their workforce, or benefits administration systems, which is a piece of that. These are, companies like Workforce or Workday, I meant, and UKG and even ADP. So there's a limited set of these companies. I mean, there are more than there used to be, but there's a limited set of these companies. And then we were looking for the person or people within that organization that specifically are responsible for building the file feeds that pass employee information from companies to the HRIS or Ben admin system, and potentially to insurance carriers, on a regular basis, right? So this is a very specific role at a very limited number of companies. And I was like, there's no way. There's no way we're going to be able to do this. But we did. We were able to find them. And what we did is we built a list of these companies. I would guess there were probably 15 to 20 companies on this list. We gave that list along with the role titles that might, be relevant for that role. I did some LinkedIn due diligence to look for that, to a recruiter, and they got them. So I was kind of floored. And we did two different studies, and I don't think there was one person overlap between those two studies. So they really got, 27 of these people, right? So again, I think that just for me, that was like such a strong example of what these folks can do, because I would have told you that that might be impossible. And then another example, we were looking for individuals at IMO, and IMO is a independent marketing organization. They sell, like, financial advisors may buy certain financial products through an IMO. And we were looking at the folks within, again, a limited set of IMOs in the country, who decide which products and providers they will sell, that they use, what goes on their shelf, so to speak. So again, super limited, a high level sort of decision maker at those organizations. We gave them a list of IMOs. We kind of gave them who we were looking for, and we were able to do 20 IDIs. So I have some just other like countless audiences that we've used these recruiters for. So HSA providers, decision makers for insurance in certain industries, subject matter experts, so people who are really like high in the industry, kind of expertise in certain areas, CFOs, We often do HR benefits decision makers, but we sometimes need them at like 10,000 employee plus companies, which, obviously is more limiting and difficult. Pharmacy benefit managers. Some of these audience I work with and some of them I don't. But in any case, my point is wide variety of difficult B2B audiences. I'm trying to think if I've ever had them say, no, we can't do that. We probably have. Nothing jumps to mind. So I do think they're a great tool. Great tool. Um, let's talk about a third approach here, industry sources. Now, this is of these tools, I think this one is leveraged maybe the least, and there's some opportunity here. So any job, any B2B person, right, has a job. So any profession generally has professional organizations or associations, trade publications, and industry events, conferences, right? Maybe there's some that don't, but for the most part, that is generally true. So sometimes professional organizations or associations and trade publications will give access to their members or subscribers. They won't give you direct access. They're not going to, generally, they're not going to give you their list, but they may act as a gatekeeper and allow you to have access to that list as a sample source. So you would program a survey, generate a link, send them the link, they would send it out for you at a cost, right? I mean, they don't do this out of the goodness of their heart, but still, usually relatively reasonable cost. It's not like professional recruiters who are doing 1,000 a complete, right? This is generally a few $1,000s to access, the whole list. For We've used it more for quant, but you could use it for qual as well. Um, and industry events are a possible place you can go to recruit for research. Could be quant. You could go and do a survey. I've gone and done surveys on an iPad. People take there. We've recruited for qual at an industry event. So again, I think this is something that probably isn't leveraged as often. Now, the industry event one is very timing specific, right? If you need to do something a certain time of year and the big event for that industry is another time of year, that's not going to work. But it's something to think about as you're planning for your research. So some examples of where we have done this. Um, we needed to talk to directors of large nonprofits, specifically in the arts and culture and human services area. So that's a slice of the nonprofit space. And we needed to talk to fairly large organizations, right? So very large museums, for example. We needed to do both qualitative interviews, 24, and a quantitative survey. So it's a big ask. It was tough. And this is a perfect example of I tried to do the quant with a panel who promised me the moon, and it was garbage, and I threw it all away and had to start from scratch. Turns out that was Research for Good, which, if anyone knows, they went out of business for all sorts of shady dealings. People may have gone to jail. So that my one experience with them, I very quickly vetted that, and we dropped them, and we kind of had to start over. So in this case, we were able to get access to a subscription list for a nonprofit, a publication for nonprofits, right? And they allowed us to access that list again through them, to be able to accomplish this, which was great. Great quality sample, great quality of data. Another example, and we've done this more than once, long haul truck drivers. As you might imagine, long haul truck drivers are really hard to research because they're out and about. They're out driving, right? They are not in one place. A little bit of a different audience than some of the ones we've been talking about. Still niche B2B. We do P&C research, so still, that trucking insurance is relevant to us. In this case, we went to MATS. MATS is the Mid-America Trucking Show. These long haul truck drivers go to the show. They have big semis in the middle of the conference space. It's really interesting. And we sponsored a booth. And in this case, we decided to do on-site. So we did 3 in-person focus groups at the event. So the first day and a half of the event, we recruited for, the second night and the third night to do focus groups, or the second night, and I think it was like day and night, the third day. And they loved it. They loved getting a break from walking the floor, to sit and have some snacks, and do research, get paid. So we've done that more than once and it's been very successful. And again, if you know you're looking at a specific audience that's interesting to you, you think about what events they have, when are they coming up, trying to plan your research around that. Because that can be a really, again, cost-effective way to recruit and get everybody in one place. Um, Brokers who sell group medical to large employers in specific states. So again, brokers themselves, not niche B2B, but we needed brokers who sell group medical insurance to very large companies and only within specific states. So that made it like a much more niche ask. We needed a quant survey, even more difficult. And again, there's an insurance publication for financial services and insurance professionals called Insurance Newsnet that gave us access to their subscription list to be able to reach those folks. Again, through them, they sent out the survey invitation. So again, I think this is one I don't see get leveraged quite as often, and I think can be really effective in certain circumstances. The last one I want to talk about here is building with online sources and networking. So in some ways, this is like an old school approach of basically building sample, right? When I first started, that was a thing. You built sample. You just created one by one, going online, going on websites and building a list piece by piece to be able to use for research. Obviously easier to use for qual than quant because you need a much bigger list for the quant, but can work either way. Um, using social media groups, LinkedIn or Facebook, has lots of groups of folks that, again, I mean, there's certain barriers or gatekeeping that you have to get by, but you can gain access to those. So there's a term called scraping. I hate this term, but it's basically using AI or bots to kind of go and collect a bunch of information off websites or off a single site like a LinkedIn, and then tries to match contact information. I really, really this one's in red because LinkedIn has terms of use, and in some cases that can violate it. So you have to be really careful if you're going to implement an approach like that to do it within the terms of LinkedIn, so you're not violating it. You don't get booted from LinkedIn. There are ways to do that. There are certain ways you can, but we're really hesitant to use the sort of AI scraping because we just want to make sure that we're being compliant. So I would say everybody should be making sure they're being compliant. But there are, you can use Sales Navigator, which is a more sophisticated search engine within LinkedIn to find folks. There are tools out there that will match folks to contact information to help you build a list that way. Some examples of where we've done this. We were looking for the folks who bought the buyers of equipment in US police departments. So very specific audience. And we wanted to do quant. We need to do a quant survey because we had like a trade-off analysis. So we built the sample. We just went from site to site and found contact information and built a list. And this had to be like from large municipalities, large cities to smaller. I think there was a minimum though, so there had to be a certain size. They had to have a certain number of police officers. So it was just a lot of legwork, right? A lot of hours to build that sample. It's a great thing to use an intern for. It's really helpful. Similarly, this was qual, so it wasn't as big of an ask, but we were looking for healthcare providers, doctors who specifically worked in burn centers. So again, a very small audience, but good news is you can search burn centers. You can find burn centers in the country, get a list of burn centers in the country, and then go and find the information for the different folks who work there. And then finally, breast milk donation centers. Not finally, there's one more after this. I don't know how much more niche you can get than that. But with permission, we posted in Facebook group of donating women who donate their breast milk. And we were able to network to the centers that they used to find. We only needed 12 IDIs. And then the last one is subject matter experts. So we were looking not just for people who work in nursing or rehab facilities, caregiving facilities, but we were looking for subject matter experts. We were looking for the people who write books on it, who speak on it, who, have built organizations. And so this we just networked through LinkedIn to find and message experts on caregiving to to ask them to participate. Again, this time we only needed six. It was part of a larger effort, but we were able to do that successfully. So this one requires that's a lot of effort, unless you're using some of the AI tools that are out there, again, which you can, but can get you what you need if most professions have some kind of website. Not always is their contact information out there, but often it is. So just kind of to sum up and think about what you should do going forward. Obviously, always look inside first, see what you have, other people in your organization may have, use the tools at your disposal to help make research easier. I mean, some of that, the branding and communication can work in conjunction with some of these other approaches. Identify specialty recruiting partners, vet them, ask for examples of work that they've done with the audiences you're looking for or similar audiences, so that you can feel confident that they can get you what you're looking for and that they've done so successfully. And then, I think under leverage, look at what trade publications and events associations are out there in the specific audiences you're looking for and see if that allows you to access sample. So that's it. That's in a nutshell. I hope it was helpful. I hope folks, heard something maybe that they hadn't or had a thought or idea. The Q&A is still open if anyone wants to ask a question. My email's up here if anybody wants to email me or just wants to hear more detail about a case study that I touched on, and what we did and how we did it. More than happy to chat further. But thank you so much for being here, for attending. I really appreciate it. We had such a great showing. I think probably the most I've had in a long time. So thank you so much, everybody. And I'm just gonna look at I don't see anybody coming up with questions. So, but again, feel free to reach out afterwards if you have any thoughts. And let me know. Just shoot me a note if you had any thoughts on the presentation or anything was helpful. I'd love to hear. Thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day.